Chapter 18, Two of Us, page 166. Note, Beatles music would evolve from the most naive that there are writers could imagine to the most liberated, their first hit in America being their second in the UK, accredited to Lennon-McCartney, though far beyond their writing skills, was launching the engineered social transformation that sold over 15 million copies worldwide. Part of the genius of the song was its sophisticated musical composition, coupled with simple childlike lyrics. As intended, the first impression in the States created the illusion of sexual inexperience. The group's pretended virginal naivete sharply contrasted with the reality of each player. George, the youngest of the group, was the last to lose his virginity. John and Paul watched without George knowing until their applause at the end. In contrast to the innocent song provided to them, all four Beatles were far beyond hand-holding fantasies well before their first recording session. William stepped in after the Virgins when it was time to outgrow the music of inhibited childhood infatuations to move into the adult world ruled by uninhibited will. William did not need to be specifically directed to end the Beatles' childish love songs. He had already been indoctrinated with the idea that their music would grow up and occasionally contributed to it. With such training, his call to end their love song era was fully anticipated by those in control. He realized later that in this instance, as in many others, he thought he was exercising free will but was doing exactly as trained. Page 168. Note, as discussed in Apple Corps Ltd, Chapter 51, the Beatles created Apple Corps to invest in new talent, their first American artist, having ties to Laurel Canyon and represented by Peter Gordon, was James Taylor. When he auditioned for George and Paul, James sang his favorite song that he had written thus far, Something in the Way She Moves. As JT sang it, George pictured the way his own wife moves, looks his way or calls his name. That audition song and George's adoration of his wife, Pattie Boyd, inspired George's best Beatles song, Something, which borrowed the first 6 words of the audition song. Pattie also inspired the Beatles songs, If I Needed Someone and For You Blue. Furthermore, Pattie inspired some of Eric Clapton's best songs, Layla and Wonderful Tonight. Layla, written in 1970, draws the name from the story of Layla and Majnun by Nizami Ganjavi 1141-29, who based that poem on a 7th century love story. Clapton wrote Wonderful Tonight in 1976, while waiting for Pattie to get ready to attend Paul and Linda McCartney's annual Buddy Holly party. Pattie divorced George in 1977 and was married to Eric from 1979 to 1989. Chapter 19, Tuesday Afternoon is Never Ending, page 179. Note, Chapter 20, Wednesday Morning Papers Didn't Come, page 183. Note, B at Lezo. Donna appears to have been headed to Lezo, a street in Mezzocco, Switzerland, about 666 miles southeast of London, or 600 miles from Staffordshire. Lezo is an Italian word meaning injured. Chapter 21, Thursday night, your stockings needed mending, page 187. Note, with adjusted capitalization and punctuation, Eleanor Rigby's shared gravestone says, in loving memory of my dear husband John Rigby, who departed this life October 4th, 1915, aged 72 years, at rest. Also, Frances, wife of the above, died April 3, 1928, aged 85 years. Also, Doris W., daughter of F&E Rigby, died D-Take 24, 1927, aged 2 years and 3 months. Also, Eleanor Rigby, the beloved wife of Thomas Woods and daughter of the above, died 10th October 1939, aged 44 years. Asleep. Also, Frances, daughter of the above, died 2nd Nov 1949, aged 71 years. While looking for Eleanor's grave, you might also find that of George Toogood Smith, also buried there. His wife, Mimi, Julia's older sister, complained to Liverpool Social Services when John had to share the bed of his mother and her lover when they moved in with him. Mimi eventually gained custody. John loved his Aunt Mimi and Uncle George. In 1971, John moved to New York and never returned to the UK, but continued telephoning Mimi every week up until the night before he was slain. Page 188. Note, Christians may ask, what would Jesus do, William? When pushed to self-identify as Krishna, asked the same question. He was dismayed by the conflict of interests. He considered the disruptions that Krishna and Jesus did to the establishments of their times and realized that if he were Krishna, his commitment to truth and light would ultimately exceed his loyalty to those who put him in power. If he were Jesus or Krishna, he would enlighten the world to whatever extent the people can receive it. However, most would reject it. When the truth is revealed, most people either run for it or from it. Page 190. Note, to prevent people from suspecting that Mackenzie refers to the ghostwriter Patrick Mackenzie, William created a story to show how Paul came up with that name. As the story goes, Paul looked up McCartney in a phone book and scanned down. When he found Mackenzie, which sounds similar, he replaced McCartney. Page 191. Note, the false-faced woman wore a mask that she kept in a jar by the door, meaning that she took off the false identity only when at home. It poetically foretold William always wearing Paul's image preserved for the public. William, however, painted a significantly different perspective. In his 1994 painting, Ancient Connections, the mask represents Paul McCartney as their combined identity behind that public mask. The ancient gods are the real ones running their avatar. Ancient gods play as the modern rock idol. Chapter 22, Friday Night Arrives Without a Suitcase, page 200. Note, Bobby Fuller's resonance with Paul McCartney shows up in the mystery of his death. Paul, 18th June 1942, 11 September 1966, and Bobby, 22 October 1942, 11 September 1966, were born on Thursdays, 18 weeks apart. Paul was born 126 days sooner and died 55 days later, giving him a day short of 6 months more. The rising Texan star of the Bobby Fuller Four posed no significant threat to the Beatles' Fab Four. However, if those sacrificing Paul needed an antithetical American match, Bobby was a good candidate. Bobby's right hand was fractured in apparent retaliation for boasting that he did not require session musicians. Ritualistic torment, evidenced by blood around his mouth and by specific cuts and bruises on his face, chest and shoulders, implicated Charles Manson's followers. However, if they did carry out that sacrifice, Charles could not have orchestrated it. After dying from being forced to inhale and swallow gasoline, the corpse and car interior were doused with gasoline. An open book of matches was left on the seat. Fuller was found dead in his car at 500 as the day ended opposite of Paul, who was dead in his car at 500 as the day began. Each was slain in a car meant to become a crematorium. Both deaths were considered accidental. The memoirs, being required to fictionalize the death narrative, points away from the known 500 death time. However, Paul was slain that morning at 5 o'clock as the day begins. She's leaving home. Figuratively, the sacrificial lamb lost its fleece at dawn less than an hour before sunrise. George, who points to that time on the back cover of the Sgt. Pepper's album, later sings Caresses, fleeced you in the morning light, casualties, Paul and Donna at dawn, when we was fab. Page 205, note. Teddy Adorno applied his musical genius to his ambition to raise consciousness. He supported the Stanford Research Center's plan to change society through rock music. Their plan, enlarged upon by others, was to cast a net wide enough for the entire rising generation, and as many others as would come. They would start with silly love songs, since that was popular at the time, and because they would hook the simplest of listeners. Once hooked, the ever-increasing fan base would be guided through a maturation process, turning their music against outmoded thinking in favor of a revolution of awakened consciousness, along with oppressive institutions. Individual personalities would be dissolved and rebuilt, transformed. Teddy claimed to despise his shallow music except as a means to the greater transformative end. William, like Teddy, understood that the early Beatles music was trite in order to capture the youngest generation, but that it was evolving much deeper. Teddy Boy objected to William's comedic work, which did not teach people to be good. However, Bill and Ted ventured to create excellently philosophically mature music that would trigger introspection. William took the band to create meaningful and provocative music that would change how people think. He did not join to write silly love songs. Chapter 23, Saturday Night's Alright, page 210. Note, the above exchange with Neil Aspinall, including modified dialogue and combining 3 events into one, illustrates how the encoder took liberties with the text. In this case, the dialogue was modified to foreshadow the hell that William would go through by becoming that celebrity. When William says, "Oh my hell, I'm that famous guy," his actual line was, "Oh my god, I'm that famous guy." Neil Aspinall was the Beatles' first road manager. After Mal Evans began working for the Beatles, Neil became their personal assistant and later the chief executive of Apple Corps. He retired on 10 April 2007, the year before he died of lung cancer. Jeff Jones, who replaced Neil as CEO, has overseen many projects and innovations, including the Beatles remastered catalogue, the Beatles rock band, and the Cirque du Soleil collaboration with its Love album. Although three of Jeff's big projects shared the Memoirs of Billy Shears 09.09 release, most of this book was finished before Jeff started. Page 212. Note: the media promoted the idea of Paul as the cute Beatle. Without that manipulation, others of the group may have each seemed cuter to more fans. Those who used the band to change the world sought a face that would characteristically feature the eye of Providence. Paul's raised eyebrow, inherited from his father, strengthened his position. Others in the inner circle, also impressed by Paul's resemblance to William, considered the possibility and implications of Paul eventually being replaced by the magician's son. For 4 years they pushed for that prospect. For the eye symbolism intended by all and for added significance, if they were to replace Paul with William, as pushed by some individuals demanded that the media not only make the Beatles the brightest stars in the heavens, but that they single out Paul for his looks. They made his symbolic right eye a subconscious point of adoration when fans gazed at their idol. To elevate the Beatles, George Martin was ordered to not only contact the Beatles and to produce their work, but to use his own musical skills as if played by them to present the Beatles' music as perfectly as possible. All other bands would be as they are. The Beatles would be perfect. Page 214. Note: however astonishing it is that Paul was replaced, the biggest story is that the substitution occurred as part of Tavistock's worldwide mind control operation that is still succeeding today with Committee of 300's resources. Replacing the most adored celebrity anywhere was only possible by the powerful central organization that directed national governments to stay out of the way, while the largest newspapers, TV channels and radio stations, along with the most influential players in the entertainment industry, all perpetuated the McCarthy myth, as brazen as it was to create such a fictional superstar in the first place and then to switch him out for another actor. It was not the beginning, pinnacle or the end of their worldwide mind control. They govern public perception and opinion through the media's presentation of false flags and other fake news, and by creating or buying control of media platforms when they seek to frighten the world into war, totalitarianism, gun control, vaccines or any other viewpoint. Opposing views are blocked and labeled as subversive, unsafe misinformation that violates community standards. To fully comprehend Paul's replacement is to know that we are still being manipulated by governments and the legacy media under the direction of the worldwide cabal. William says, "My story is only a key to opening your mind to the bigger worldview." If this book is ever discredited for damage control, it will be because William began to reach that goal too soon.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.